All right, let's begin lesson 35, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing decimal numbers. I really wanted to piggyback this on lesson 34, but it's amazing how many interruptions happen when you're trying to record these videos. Phone rings, which it never rings. People show up at your door who never come to your door. It's kind of goofy, but let's give this a shot. So the key is, first we're going to talk about adding decimal numbers. And when we are adding decimal numbers, the key to that is line up the decimal points. Line up those decimal points. If you don't line them up, you're going to get it wrong. You line them up in a nice, neat, orderly line, which you guys don't do very well, and we will have to keep working on not the decimal thing, but just lining up. So I'm going to put down 3 decimal numbers that we're adding, and the key to doing this is making sure that they are all lined up. And because all we're doing is adding, it doesn't matter the order that we add them in. So, but I'll just go with the order that's written down. So 3 6/10, 36 hundredths, and lastly 36, and we can add those 3 up. Now sometimes it's helpful, if you would like, to fill in the gaps with some zeros, just so you can see where things line up. And you just add up like you've been adding your whole life. 39 96 hundredths. Okay, you've been adding a long time, and that's simply all that you're doing. Now you can do that when, for instance, you have a rectangle and you need to find the perimeter of that shape. You can so piggyback on that last time's lesson, 3/10 of a meter is the same thing as saying how many centimeters. The answer would be 30 and 20 centimeters for your width, or 300 millimeters or 200 millimeters for the width. But it's in meters, so we are going to do that, and we're finding the perimeter of that shape, so we can add up all our components there, 2 lengths and 2 widths, add those up, and we get 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 2 is 8, and we end up with another 2, which is 10. So basically we end up with 1 meter. Okay, pretty cool. Now, subtraction. When we subtract decimal numbers, the handy dandy rule for that is line up your decimal points. Line those puppies up. If you don't line them up, you're going to have a problem. So if we're 12 3/10 minus 4 567 thousandths, line those things up. Now this time you do want to fill in the gaps. I am going to make that to 3 decimal places, just like my other number is, because you really want to add up those gaps. And once you do that, and you can move your decimal point down, the rest of that is simple borrowing. And when you do all of that subtraction, that's what you end up with. Oops, and my 0 is kind of like a 6, so I need to fix that. And the only problem with moving your decimal down is you probably want to rewrite that number, because it looks like 7 times 733. And when you get sloppy and careless, you get stuff wrong. And I would have gotten this one wrong, so I rewrote it here. And it looked like that. So I want to make sure that it's accurate. So let's try another one. 5 minus 4 and 32 hundredths. It's the same deal. I'm going to write 5 with 2 decimal places. And I'm going to subtract, just like I've been subtracting for, great chunks of my life. Okay? Simple as that. 68 hundredths. Now multiply. How do you multiply decimal numbers? Well, this time, for adding and subtracting, I've been saying line up those decimal points. Make sure you line those things up. This time, we're not going to line them up. but our multiplying works just like we've been multiplying fractions. Like, for example, we've been doing this. 3/10 times 7/10 equals 21/100, right? And we've, when we multiply, we're going to do the same thing. 3/10 times 7/10 equals 21/100. Okay? It's the same thing, it's just a different wording, different process. So we can multiply decimals quite easily as well. This time we don't line up the decimal points. So let me put in another rectangle here. Here's my rectangle. Okay, got a rectangle, and this rectangle is 4/10 of a meter, and this one is 25/100 of a meter, or 25 centimeters, or 40 centimeters, or so on. All right, so what do I do to solve this problem? Well, first I need to do some multiplication. Now, this time I do not line up my decimal points. This time I multiply as normal, as you've been multiplying for a while. Notice, why do I put 25/100 on top, even though that's a smaller number, but it's got more digits in it, so that's why I'm going to use that. So when I multiply, and I multiply the whole thing out, this only has one decimal place, this has two decimal places, so keep that in mind. When I multiply it out, I end up with these numbers. And what you need to be aware of is you need to count your decimal places. There are 1, 2, 3 decimal places. So I go down to the bottom, start in the back, and I go 1, 2, 3. So my answer is 1/10 of a meter for my squared. Okay, 1/10 of a square meter is my answer to this problem. So keep that in mind. Now, what if you wanted to find out how many centimeters were on your ruler? Well, if you recall that 1 centimeter equals, sorry, I said that wrong. Let's rewrite that. Cross that, scratch that. Let's clear that so I don't. Let's clear that. 1 inch equals 2 54/100 centimeters. Okay, so 2.5 or so centimeters fit inside an inch. So if there's 12 inches on the ruler, then I'm going to multiply 2 54/100 times 12. 12 as a whole number this time. And when I multiply it out, I get 508, and I also get 254. And then I add those things up as I would normally multiply, and I get 3048. Okay, now what you want to do is count your decimal places, and they only have 2 on the top line, none on the bottom line, so my answer is there. So that's how many centimeters are in a meter. I mean, in an inch ruler, 12-inch ruler. Okay? All right, 300 squared. We want to simplify that. Now, we could sometimes, with these things, we can do these in our heads. Okay, so let's think about this. What is 3 squared? 3 squared is, should be saying 9. 3 squared is 9. Now, let's count some decimal places. I'm multiplying 300 times 300. That's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So, since I have a 9, let's start with the decimal place after the 9, right here, and let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal place. Insert zeros, and so our answer is 9/10 thousandths. So we multiply, and then I do the decimals, and we did that largely without writing everything out, because we could do that in our head, and we just had to count our empty spaces, which is pretty neat. Now, dividing decimal numbers. Dividing decimal numbers is a little bit different, and there's a couple things with that, and today we're only going to do one of those things. We're going to divide by a whole number. It's like dividing dollars and cents. So let's divide 7 2/10 by 4. And the only main rule is this, is your division works exactly like division should work, except for one thing. If you see your decimal point, you want to move that straight up before you divide. Move it up, and since you moved it up, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But you do need to be careful that you don't miss any places as we do this. So let's do this problem. Okay, 4 goes into 7 one time, do your subtraction, and you end up with 3, bring down the 2, and it goes into 8 times, right? And you get down to 0, and you end up with the answer of 1 8/10. Now, like I said, you need to be careful. The one thing I see students mess up the most through the years when they're dividing by decimals is they forget, or dividing decimals by whole numbers, is they forget what place they're working on. So you need to be very careful, and what I suggest is fill in each gap as you go. Okay, fill in each gap as you go. 8 is going to go into 0 exactly 0 times. 8 is going to go into 0 again 0 times. 8 is going to go into 1 0 times. And this is the place that people often mess up, because 8 goes into 1 none times, no times, but 8 goes into 14 1 times. And what I would see happening the most is that 1 gets put in the wrong spot. So really, really be diligent about where you put your numbers. Because the 1's going over to 4, because that's the number that you're looking at. You're looking at 14, not the 1. And oftentimes this one ends up here, and that's where you would get it wrong. So 14 minus 8 is 6. Bring down the 4, you get 64. 8 goes in 64 8 times. So you can see what your answer is going to be. So you want to be very, very diligent that you don't make a mistake. And again, let's try another one with a similar theme to that. 1 2/10 divided by 5. Okay. 5 is not going to go in 1 at all, so I'm going to write a 0 there. 5 is going to go in 12 2 times, and I'm going to bring my 2 down. Now, what you want to do here is you're going to have to add a 0 because the problem's not done yet. You can't have a remainder in this. Either your answer is going to stop, or it's going to repeat, or it's going to go on forever. So you got to add a 0 to find out what's going to happen. You bring that 0 down, and 5 goes on 20. That means your problem stops. So be aware of that. Later on, we're going to do some stuff. What happens when it doesn't stop? What happens when it repeats? What happens when it goes on forever? So we're going to talk about that in another lesson. So for today, go ahead, give every other practice problem a shot. Every other practice a shot. Thanks. Have a great night.